joining us today. We're very pleased to have Virginia Leigh. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Sorry if I'm not. And she is running for Sheriff, Essex County Sheriff. So excellent. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure to join you. Thank you so much, Christopher. Yes, my name is Virginia Leigh, and I am a licensed clinical social worker running for Sheriff of Essex County. Anytime there's a challenger to an incumbent, you really have to ask yourself, what is going so wrong that we have to replace the incumbent with someone new? And so my hope tonight is to share a little bit with you about just that, what I think we can actually expect from the Sheriff's Department and what I hope to deliver as your next Sheriff of Essex County. I will note that this is a historic race because we have never seen, as far as my research has led me to believe, we have never seen a licensed clinical social worker run for sheriff anywhere in the country, let alone in the county, and certainly Essex County has never had a female sheriff. So to answer the question of why should we replace an incumbent with someone new, we do need to think a little bit about history. And I know that Lois and Ms. Hazel as well have heard a little bit about this, but we have to do a little bit of history digging, because the reason that we have the assumptions we do about the sheriff's office is because of where the sheriff began 250 years ago or more. We originally designed the Sheriff's Department to have a law enforcement wing, as well as the steward and custody holder of all of the inmates in the county, because at the time we didn't have any police departments. But in the last 250 years, quite a lot has changed, including the fact that I stand before you or sit before you now, able to vote in this country, among many other changes. And one of those things that have changed is that we developed and created police departments that now actually hold the law enforcement arm of the county or of each municipality. And what remains on the county level as the sheriff's job is actually the administrator of the jail, the steward of all of the prisoners in the county, responsible for their care, their treatment, their rehabilitation, and ultimately their reentry back into the community. So when we judge the sheriff, we have to decide to judge the sheriff based on what their responsibilities actually are. Reducing our recidivism, reducing crime by helping people to make different choices when they have come out of incarceration. And in order to understand whether we should replace our incumbent, we have to ask ourselves a few questions about the status quo. The status quo currently is the highest recidivism rate that has clung to 47% plus the entirety of the current sheriff's term. 47% means that almost 1 out of every 2 people who leaves the county jail in Middleton has returned back into the system in some way within 1 year. We have to ask ourselves how we feel about that, if that's the type of recidivism rate we would hope to have, because that's the indicator of what we do currently have. We also have to ask ourselves how we feel that prisoners in our county are receiving the mental health treatment that they need. What we know is that within the first 9 days of incarceration, prisoners are at the highest risk of committing suicide. And that is not exclusive to Middleton Jail. We have had multiple suicides in Middleton Jail during this past term. We have to ask ourselves if we think that our correctional officers are being fully supported in their own mental health and their challenges in facing this very difficult job of being caretakers to people who are being held without their will. And the reality is that in Massachusetts, correctional officers' suicide rates have climbed to 12 times the general public's rate of suicide. And we have to ask ourselves these questions, because when we think about the expertise that we look for in the sheriff's department, we need to realize that we are looking at a moment of change, an opportunity in our history when we can make a different choice and when we can expect different results as a result of choosing different expertise. I've been a clinical social worker for 12 plus years. In community mental health, I've worked in detention centers, both in the US and in Mexico. I have worked in community health centers. I am bilingual in Spanish and English. I've worked with people who are victims of crime, people who have perpetrated crimes against others, people who are seeking affordable housing and unable to find it, people who are struggling with substance use and addiction. And I know as a clinician about the underpinnings of what causes crime at the county level. I am running to be your chief clinician, your very first chief clinician of what is our largest mental health and substance use treatment facility in the county, and what has never, up until this point, received the substantive and clinical expertise to run it in such a way. We can give lip service to programs. We can talk all day long about the kinds of mental health and reentry programs, but if we don't put our money and the budget where the mouth is, we will continue to see the status quo. So I'm so excited to talk with you today, to meet new folks and see familiar faces here as I learn about the voters' priorities here in Salem and across the county. It's really an opportunity for you to choose something different. And when I think about what is possible, when we put the right expertise into the right institution, the sky is the limit. When we offer to schools and education facilities principals who actually have teaching experience, we are so much better off. When we make sure that, you know, artists get to do art and brain surgeons get to do brain surgery, and that they are put in positions where they are able to use their expertise, we reap the benefits. So I thank you very much. I'm happy to take any kind of questions that you have. And I'm just so grateful to see everyone out today. And I wish you a wonderful and beautiful warm evening.
Thank you so much for joining us. Is there anybody, so let me switch into gallery mode here, with a question? John, go for it.
Thank you. Geez, now I have to talk. You gave some interesting statistics, Virginia, like 47% recidivism. See, you can say the word, I can't. People returning to the prison. I'm wondering what that is, how that compares to other communities within Massachusetts. And that's a start. I've got two other questions. Let's hear that.
Sure, of course. So our recidivism is double digits higher than the national average in Essex County. And as I have been doing research on our recidivism over time, I've seen that back in 2009, even at the height of our Great Recession, recidivism rates, even in Essex County, were far lower than what they are now. I believe that those recidivism rates were in the low 30s. I want to say, please don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that they were in the low 30s. I will get that information as we're here and I'll put it in the chat. And they have jumped and dipped since then until 2016 when the incumbent took over. And since 2016, where they started at 46%, they have only climbed since there. And now that includes a year of pandemic when we were quite literally shut away in our homes, and people saw reductions in crime, in fact. And yet at the sheriff's department, recidivism continued to be at an all-time high. I have heard informally from correctional officers that it's even higher than 47%, but I don't have that data because the current annual report from 2021 is not out yet.
Well,
So I will
thank
say
you.
it's higher both in comparison to the past here in the county and in comparison to the national averages.
And then I also like to ask a question. I believe you said you've worked in different prison settings in Mexico and elsewhere. And I'd like to hear more about what your experience is, because you've never been a sheriff, I don't think. You've never been in charge of a prison community. So I'm curious of what your experience would be and how it applies to this type of position.
Sure, of course. Yes, so I have worked in detention centers. I worked in a high security juvenile detention center out in Westboro, Massachusetts. And I also worked in a youth detention center in the city, the border city of Ciudad Juarez in Chihuahua, Mexico. My job in those roles was to be a clinician and a program director. I formed an education program while in Mexico. I grant funded the program and also saw it into fruition with the help of the Mexican version of the DCF. What's up here is considered the Department of Children and Families, and in Mexico it's called the DIF, the DCF equivalent. When I was here in Westboro, I worked in the, like I said, the maximum security detention center for girls who had either committed such crimes that were unable to be housed in regular detention centers, or had their behavior was so unsafe in other detention centers that they had to be housed in this particularly secure setting. I was a clinician there and worked alongside other clinicians, making programs and learning about the evidence-based treatment that is used in the DYS system. Unfortunately, one thing that I did learn while working in the DYS system was that it really matters what kind of evidence-based treatment you use. Because in reality, you could say to yourself, for example, that group therapy is useful and helpful for people in an inpatient setting, but put that same modality into a prison setting where no one feels safe to speak about vulnerable issues in a group, and you realize that actually that type of treatment may not at all be evidence-based or helpful. So with respect to the Sheriff's Department job, I believe that my clinical experience and also the program leadership that I have already done, leading training programs in Community Health Center in Lynn and starting up programs as well in Brockton during my time there. I believe that my experience in leadership, as well as my clinical focus and the capacity to build the right kind of team, will make it possible for me to successfully implement what we have not been able to do so far, which is true evidence-based treatment that is fully supported by the staff ratios and the supports, wraparound supports that are needed for folks as they return home to their communities.
Okay, thank you. Yet another question.
John, I'm
it
gonna
sounds
hold you
like
off
you're-
just there one
I'll
second.
drop
just
my
'cause I have a
hand.
couple other people, so I'm gonna,
All
it'll
right.
be Marcia, then Liz, and then John will circle back to your last
Okay,
question.
thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So Marcia, take it away.
Sorry, I'm off site from my house. Thank you, Virginia, for coming. Really appreciate your running. I'm interested in your perspective as a woman and what you feel is challenging and how you feel you can overcome that, as the Sheriff's Department has kind of had a bit of a reputation as kind of being an old boys club. How do you feel like you can bring something unique, and how would you build relationships with the staff if you were elected into this role?
Oh, that is such an excellent question, Marcia. And I'm a
truth teller, just so you know.
Well, don't worry.
Like I asked the question.
I'm a Quaker too, so I speak truth to power.
I'm not a Quaker, I'm a truth teller.
We tend to be truth tellers as well, so we're in good company. I will say I'm actually really excited to answer that question, because although it is very difficult to run for any office for that matter, but certainly run for an office that has historically been, and not just historically, but currently been dominated by men across the country. I believe women account for only 3% of sheriffs across the country at this current time. It is a difficult thing to face some of the experiences that one does when running for an office that is conventionally considered for a different kind of person. But I will say this. I have actually been contacted by multiple retired staff members of the Sheriff's Department, primarily correctional officers, assistant superintendents, who have thanked me for deciding to run. And the reason that they have thanked me is because they know that they need support, and they know that they are not getting it. Not only in how to support and care and steward and really complete the job of stewarding the people who are under their care. You can't have a program that you say is evidence-based and working when you have 1,300 inmates and 2 clinicians to serve that entire population. That is actually not called evidence-based. But in addition to that, correctional officers are reporting across the board a tremendous amount of job dissatisfaction. And one of the main reasons is because of how the job impacts their own mental health. And so I have been actually pleasantly surprised, Marcia, to be actually sought out by some of the folks who are either currently work in the Sheriff's Department or formerly work in the Sheriff's Department, saying, my goodness, we need a different perspective. And it's so refreshing and such a relief to have someone running who is thinking of things from a mental health perspective, from a substance use perspective, from a human-centered perspective, which allows us to imagine doing our jobs differently. Now, that's not to say that everybody's going to be on board. Cultural change in an institutional level is not easy. But also neither is being a clinician. And I have worked my entire professional life speaking with people and creating space where people feel heard. That's what a therapist does. And I will tell you, I have had people who could not be more different than me on the ideological spectrum and are vocal about it in my therapy rooms in the various places that I have met people in community mental health. And they leave telling me that they have felt heard. They leave telling me that they have done the work they wanted to do. And that's what I intend to do in every setting that I step foot in.
Thank you.
Liz.
Hi, Virginia. I'm very glad you're running. I saw you in Danvers, and it's very refreshing. Paul Tucker spoke at that meeting about the horrors of solitary confinement in the jails. And I'm just wondering, in your experience with the teenaged women in detention, how much was social isolation used, and how much of it is going on in Middleton Jail, and how would you work to end that devastating practice?
Sure. Well, I will say this: at the DYS level, solitary confinement in the program that I worked in was not used. I mean, time away, isolation during conflict and high conflict moments certainly was a part of how to keep both people safe from themselves and also people safe from each other at different points in time. And I will say this is another tiny history lesson, but Quakers actually created the penitentiary system. They created it as an alternative, a humane alternative to the corporal punishment, floggings, all of the ways that medieval times kind of exacted justice upon the populations of folks who had committed crimes. And the thing that Quakers got wrong is that there is a soul death that happens in solitary confinement. When you are not in contact with other human beings for 23 plus hours of the day, something inside you dies, and there is no evidence to suggest that that is the right or the safe way to respond to safety issues inside of a locked unit. So at Middleton Jail, my understanding is that, and I will say, you know, transparency is a challenge at the Middleton Jail. So this is information that I have, you know, heard from people who would know. But solitary confinement is used, and it's used, and there are, you know, assistant superintendents who are in charge of solitary confinement. I do not believe that solitary confinement is safe for anyone. I do, however, believe that sometimes for the safety of prisoners, staff, or other, you know, the other community members, that people do need to be able to be isolated away. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't have programming. That doesn't mean that a therapist who would come to see that prisoner is literally talking to them through the peephole with all of the other inmates on the row, listening to a confidential, you know, therapy session, which is what has happened where we live here today. So I believe that actually isolation for safety's sake is very possible and does not have to exclude programming and treatment and time with other human beings in a safe manner.
Thank you.
John, you're going to be our last question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Oh, John, I can't
John,
hear you. You're on
You're
mute.
muted.
Is that better? Thank you.
For me.
You've made a compelling case, and I really appreciate that you're letting me grill you. You've made a compelling case for having a licensed social worker acting as sheriff, and you can't do it alone. If you become sheriff, it sounds like there's going to be a dramatic staffing change. And how is that going to happen? I don't see Essex County coming up with a boat full of money for you. So that's my question.
It's a beautiful question, and I don't mind the grilling at all. This is one of the most important things I have ever done in my life, aside from becoming a mom. And this job interview deserves and merits the grilling that you are giving me and much more. So I'm grateful for your questions. And I will say it does require staff shifting. Right now we have anywhere from 1,000 to 1,300 prisoners in the Middleton jail on any given day. And we have 600 correctional officers, and we have reportedly two clinicians. Now, if you know anything about city and county politics and budgetary things, you'll know that, you know, a hefty budget of I believe it's between $50 and $70 million a year. There is often areas where we can slim down the budget in order to boost it in other areas. Now, the other thing that you have to think about is every single prisoner who returns back to the system costs the county about $55,000 a year. So when we reduce recidivism, we invest in money savings. And when we do that, we have the ability to expand our staff and to actually implement the kinds of expertise that we really need. Now, the other thing I will say is, and you know, this is me, you know, putting clinicians' business out there, but we are actually a little bit more affordable than some of the staff that that are in the county jail at this time, because you know, we haven't done all of the advocating for our own well-being that we can. But I will say that it's really, really important that we realize that when we prevent crime and when we prevent recidivism, we save money and we open up new avenues for where to hire new staff. We also have the ability to train staff that we already have in clinical practice. And that doesn't just mean a couple of CEUs here and there. That means helping even correctional officers to go to social work school. Many people are feeling very under-resourced in for themselves and would like to have the kinds of clinical background that social workers have. So I think there's actually a lot of creative ways that we can make the budget work for what we'd like to do, what I would like to do.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Virginia. This has been really enlightening, really great. I'm going to try to not fanboy too hard. Yeah, no, this is lovely. So thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to see all of you. I look forward to seeing you at the Salem Arts Festival coming up. And I ask you humbly for your vote on September 6th.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We'll let you get back to your evening. And Linda has dropped the website for Virginia, votevl.com. Feel free to check that out at your leisure. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. It was really great having you.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. Take care.